and welcome to Dialogue. The International Monetary Fund has issued a stark warning. U.S. President Donald Trump's unpredictable tariff policy and the resulting countermeasures by America's trading partners will likely deal a heavy blow to economies worldwide, with the U.S. prosperity hit particularly hard. Meanwhile, China's economy in the first quarter increased by 5.4% over last year, exceeding expectations. What does the IMF forecast reveal about the state of the global economy? Can the uncertainty triggered by U.S. tariffs be contained? And what more can China do to sustain economic growth amid increasingly complex and severe external challenges? Join us for our discussion today from Beijing. I'm Xu Qinduo. Joining me today are Professor Liu Baocheng from the University of International Business and Economics, Dr. William Li, Chief Economist at the Milken Institute, and Daryl Guppy, CEO of GuppyTraders.com. Well, Baocheng, I will start with you. In its 2025 World Economic Outlook, the IMF predicts that U.S. prosperity will be hit hard by Trump's trade war, reducing its 2025 growth forecast down to 1.8%, compared with 2.8% expansion last year. U.S. inflation is also expected to reach 3% this year, and the probability of a recession has risen to 40%, up from 25% in the previous outlook. So what do you make of these figures?
I think it makes a compelling sense. In that Donald Trump is not only dealing with the whole world, launching a whole blanket of tariff that is really triggering the shockwave of the world, and the other countries are still in the hesitating position as how to respond to the United States, while China is now hitting hard back. And when the two biggest economies in the world are really wrestling with each other, that's going to have a very negative spillover effect on the global economic performance, and even to shake the confidence in further multilateralism. So the other is that the U.S. seems to be very tough on the Fed. So I do not think Trump is going to win the confrontation with the Federal Reserve, where they still stick to a more of a tightened monetary policy. So that's also going to have a drain on the economic growth, while the inflation can be kept at a reasonable level. Mm-hmm. And now the crossfire across the world is still going on, and it's going to further deepen the disruption of the global supply chain, and multiple effects can be felt, not only in terms of product trade, but in terms of the international relations, in terms of the logistic routes, all of which can produce a dragging effect on the global economic growth. So therefore, it is really there hurting the U.S. economy and hurting the U.S. consumers and business community, and also is going to re-event first by destroying the whole world trading system.
Mm-hmm. Well, William, so it seems like uncertainty, lack of confidence, and also disruption of global supply chain, basically the negative outlook, give people, of course, this negative reading of the economy.
Donald Trump was elected on the platform that we need to change the global trade system. The United States and China must renegotiate a pact that is appropriate for 21st century trade, where you have strong economies trading with each other, and the multilateral trading system that was set up is just no longer appropriate. And what China has done is to go into regional trade agreements and free trade agreements in Asia and other trading partners in the Middle East, and the United States is doing the same thing.
Are we seeing faster negotiation? Are we going to see trade deals within 90 days, as Trump said?
No, I think the situation is quite different. The major factor at the moment is this attack on the foundation of trust in the global trade system. Doesn't matter if you're talking about the WTO, doesn't matter if you're talking about tariffs as a tool to bring people to the table, which I think is ineffective. It is an erosion of trust that is most significant in terms of what's taking place. The erratic decision-making, the imposition of tariffs today, the removal of them tomorrow. We're going to have 3,000% tariffs, which are just ridiculous, on countries producing solar panels. It indicates a poor understanding of markets, of economics, and in particular of the bond market that finances the horrendous US debt. The idea that the US has been exploited and the tariffs are the answer, I think that's a little bit of a red herring. I see this more as helping to tackle US debt and its potential insolvency.
Of course, Baocheng, if you look at this global economy from the IMF forecast, it said that global economic growth will slow to 2.8% this year, down from 3.3% last year, and significantly below the historical average. And then they pointed out the US economy, previously a driver of global growth, is now acting as a drag due to its protectionist trade policies. Is this what you see, the global economy and probably the relationship with the US economy here?
Yes, I agree with William on that point that the US has really contributed a great deal in shaping global peace and development environment after the Second World War, particularly by setting up the global trading system and financial platform, etc. And now Trump is really there to financialize the contribution they have done and trying to reinvent the wheels. But the problem of uncertainty lies, first of all, is the trust issue, because he is really presenting himself as a bullying picture, negotiating merely out of power through the jungle law type of the framework. And the other is that he doesn't even know, not to mention he's really there to present what is a new picture look like. So you can always say, I don't like this way, but what about the picture of the other way? So that's something that Trump is really lacking, which is very typical of his negotiation style. And so such a lack of trust is really a thrust into the global supply chain, and many other countries are still taking a deep breath, and they do not realize, what to do. And the other is that they do not know what's going to happen next from the White House. So that type of jittery really created a standstill in terms of further engagement. So many countries are more inward-looking, and they try to win time to better understand the global situation provoked by the United States, and to see that which other partners are more reliable. Of course, they engage in more of the convenient type of trade blocks on a regional basis. And then let's see how things can really work out, because the global trade is a major driver over the years for global growth. So with now global trade is highly dampened under such a sort of shockwave, it's naturally lead to a sluggish growth.
William, earlier you mentioned about this basically like a new global trading system, and I think IMF's Christina Georgieva also talked about the economic resilience of the global community is being tested by the reboot of the global trading system. So, as you mentioned, like you are, can we say, pretty much, on the side of Trump government of a new global trading system. What is it like? The U.S., for example, talked about speedy trade deals. When the U.S. had this first round with talks with the Japanese side, after that the Japanese side complained. The U.S. side does not know what they want.
The system as it is has broken down because no one is able to agree on what is a good system for everybody. So that means that it really has been negotiated in a much smaller manner. China and U.S., what's good for the U.S.? We tried to do that with the discussions in Trump's first administration. Unfortunately, they couldn't arrive at a solution. But that's the way to proceed. You go bilaterally, you go regionally. China has, for example, been very successful in having regional trade agreements with the trading partners in ASEAN. And I think that's a good model that the rest of the world should follow. And President Trump actually is saying, we see the imbalances that the current system gives us, and therefore we want to be able to sit down and discuss seriously why we have so many bilateral imbalances. And so that really was the source of that high reciprocal tariffs, because the notion of reciprocal means I want a level playing field. What I see is a huge amount of non-tariff barriers that's causing these imbalances. And so the framework that he's offered is to say, the bigger the imbalances, clearly they're bigger the non-trade restrictions. Therefore, let's discuss them at the bargaining table seriously. And in order to make the discussion seriously and accelerate the speed, I'm going to put up a high reciprocal tariffs just to show you what the U.S. is facing in concrete terms.
The idea that the U.S. is a benevolent player in the global trading system, I think, is rather flawed. The United States believes that compliance actually is the same as cooperation. So when we're talking about reforming, for instance, the World Trade Organization, it has always been on US terms, and in fact it's tried to block China from those negotiations. So I think that's a little bit of a long bow to stretch. The other thing, of course, is that America has its own, what we call behind the border barriers, and that's common to every country. Australia has a good reputation for having many behind the border barriers. Tariffs is not a way to tackle that particular issue. I think that the real problem is the ever-growing US debt. That's the key factor. Trump is skilled at managing bankruptcy in business, and he's trying to apply the same strategies on a global scale, deferring loan repayments, the idea of 100-year bonds, cutting costs via dodgy or the Department of Government Efficiency, raising revenue through tariffs. Unfortunately, he's discovering the global economy relationships are not the same as a hotel deal. It will take time for a new global trade system, excluding the US, to develop. But the elements are already there with BRICS, with the Belt and Road Initiative, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the ASEAN RCEP trade agreements that already are in place, and that were put in place because of America's failure to support or to discuss effective reforms to the existing WTO organizations.
Is there anything we can do, US, China, the rest of the world, is there anything they can do alone or together to, let's say, bring down or reduce this uncertainty?
Trump has really recognized all the issues that the United States is facing: the high rise of the debt, the high rise of the tariff, and also the influx of fentanyl and related drugs, etc. So these are really very apparent. But whether tariff is being used as the right type of vehicle to address this issue is highly questionable. So that's one thing. The other is that by this current formula invented by Peter Navarro, you can only drive global trade onto a barter basis. Just so to have zero level of trade deficit, this is really bringing people back to the barbarian time where you bring a piece of stone, I give you a pebble. So this is not really realistic. For example, we have a trade deficit with restaurants, with the groceries, etc. So it's we are stepping into a modernized way of division of labor, and so that's not really realistic. Whether how to solve the problem, because I think time and reality are the biggest teacher. So they let him to really run more fanatic over such sort of issues. And recently, he also mentioned that I won't really look for 140%, 45% tariff is China. I'm going to see some substantially lowering, etc., etc. So he's beginning to realize it is unrealistic, and the backlash from the other countries are still in the fermentation stage. So, whether the WTO is going to be reactivated to bring a fast-track solution over such an issue. So this is something that's many other countries are cooking. But in the meanwhile, more of the regional integration programs, more of the bilateral type of treaties are also placed on the fast track so that they try to mitigate the external shocks produced by such uncertainty of the tariff.
Yes, we are seeing, Daryl, for example, the EU speed up their negotiation with the Gulf country, Arab countries, right? And EU with Japan, of course, China with ASEAN countries upgrading their free trade agreement, etc. So are we seeing, some people are talking, I think, in extreme manner, like basically trade, kind of away from the U.S. or probably reduce the risk from trading with the U.S. or from dealing with the U.S. because there's uncertainty that they see. They see there's a risk from dealing with the U.S. more closely. So, if we are not able to solve this tariff problem, so the situation will continue.
Trump's word, his written agreements, his promises can't be trusted. Now, in contrast, China offers trustworthiness, and that's very much in contrast to the United States, and that will take leadership with the global south and others. And that's something that the IMF has not taken into consideration. This is not a repeat of 1930. This is not a repeat of the Smoot-Hawley Act, because there were essentially only two major economies and no other alternatives. Here we have an alternative. China has spent a great deal of time working with the global south. This is where the future economic growth is going to come from. This isn't the third world any longer. It's moving rapidly up the, let's call it the consumer economy curve. China has good relations with this. China will be able to develop this. So in other words, Trump makes the assumption that when he imposes tariffs that there is no other choice. But China knows that in fact there are many other choices. The combined value of the economies ex the United States is much greater than that of the US. It's much greater than that of China. So there is an alternative for China's development, for China's exports, for China's economic development moving forward. I'm not too sure that Trump and Navarro in particular see that. They think that China is somehow trapped if it loses the United States market. If we close the United States market completely from a China perspective, it may wipe off 1 or 2% of China's growth. That's marginal.
Mm-hmm.
I know that, instead of dealing with 20% tariff on China and also its neighbors, so why don't really they just expedite the collective operation between China and United States in the Joint Committee to deal with drug trafficking and deal money laundering? And so they also, the most recent report also recognizes 96% of the fentanyl really came from the Mexico. So therefore, why don't they have special operation to deal with those mongers and oligarchs? So instead of talking about the tariff versus such a sort of drug trafficking. So the other is that it is really the United States companies who are making their voluntary decisions as where to invest. It could be in China, could be in India, etc. So it's a matter of competition with the best policy, with the best environment to attract those companies and capital investment instead of simply, pushing other countries to capitulate. So it's like, your boys want to, would like to play in my yard with my kids. Why do you really spank my kids? Why do you want to destroy my yard?
William here, Daryl earlier mentioned about, trust issue, of course. One part issue with a Trump government is like, it changes. It's all the time it changes. Like it changes like 3 times a day. Now it appears to have changed his tune drastically about the tariffs on China. He previously, used to be bombastic on his trade war with China. Now he's talking about we are going to be very nice, and China is going to be very nice, and 145% is too high, but it will not be zero. And also Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, also said tariff standoff with China is not sustainable, and he expects the situation to de-escalate. What's your opinion on that? Are we going to see real change in that regard?
This is the offer, right? The United States is an attractive place to invest. Come invest here, be a partner with us. But if you choose to not come and not negotiate and not do anything, then you're going to stay out of the U.S. Then we're going to give you a big tariff barrier, and you want to compete with us, then you compete against a high tariff barrier. Now, as far as China's concerned, he has always said from the very first administration onward, we need to deal with China because China is the number 2 largest economy in the world. Number one and number 2 have got to get together, shape a new international trade agreement that will be a model for the rest of the world. That was the objective in the first administration. That is still the objective now. And really the putting up that huge amount of tariffs to say, we got to get serious about this because we cannot live decoupled. The U.S. and China cannot be decoupled from each other, and because the rest of the world will suffer, whether it's China's excess surplus going into other markets or the United States actually not doing with the benefits of a lot of China's exports. So we both need each other. How we do this has to be negotiated, and that's the purpose of what President Trump has been saying all along. Sit down and negotiate.
Indeed, President himself talked about, the goal is not to decouple. But the fear is like, with the tariffs as high as 145, 125 on the Chinese side, people are seeing, at least in some sectors,
it's not sustainable, right? It's not, no. Those tariffs are so high, it's not sustainable. And they're put up that high so that let's sit down and talk. Let's lower both the tariff and non-tariff barriers on both sides, and let's get a deal. And the bilateral deal is the easiest to negotiate. Unfortunately, the U.S. and China are the 2 largest economies, and the nature of the agreement is going to be very complex, especially trade and services, intellectual property protection, and a lot of things that were not attended to in the first set of trade negotiations. They got the easy stuff in some ways first, but there's a lot of hard stuff to negotiate, and we really have to start now.
Daryl, do you foresee probably a negotiation, very soon between Washington and Beijing?
Look, I certainly agree with William in terms of that is Trump's intention. His ability to implement that policy is another question. So let's assume that William is correct and Trump and President Xi sit down. The key question becomes, can we trust what President Trump has said? And the evidence is at this point in time is that we cannot, that it may be changed overnight, that even though it's written down, it will be thrown in the rubbish bin. You cannot negotiate under those sorts of conditions. I think that's the key factor in terms of global trade and the global impact. It not just about trade. We look at his support and not support for Ukraine, his support and not support for NATO, this overthrowing of previously written agreements, overthrowing of agreements that he's reached himself in terms of North America Free Trade Agreement with Mexico and Canada. So it comes back to this essential concept of trust. Can his word be trusted? Irrespective of what his objectives are and whether they are good or bad or indifferent is another question. If you cannot be trusted, you cannot have dialogue, you cannot have agreement. And you particularly cannot have agreement if you come into the negotiation with the idea that there is my way or the highway, as they say. In other words, it's a hegemonic arrogance at its worst.
Well, of course, whether you can be trusted or not is not said by you. It's really the feeding from the other party. But anyway, we talked about the rebooting of the global trading system. Daryl, Warwick Powell, a former advisor to the former Australian Prime Minister Kevin Rudd, said, he believes we now have the end of globalization with Western characteristics and the beginning of, quote, globalization with multipolar characteristics. It's sort of similar of what we touched upon, basically, still regional integration or regional trade agreement. Countries are probably talking to each other or dealing with each other because they believe there is a trust, a certain level of trust that they can do business with. Is that the case here?
Yeah, globalization under Western rules is dead, and Trump killed it, and he killed it very quickly. Globalization under a multipolar and a multilateral structure is alive and growing. There is already a network of trade agreements with BRICS, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, BRI, RCEP, etc. These will restructure the WTO. Now, it won't be the WTO as it is today, but these are the foundations of new multilateral agreements. And China is playing a leading role in this restructuring, as we see at recent APEC and ASEAN meetings. The invitation remains for America to join in these discussions, to reorganize global trade in a way that reflects the reality of the 21st century, not of 1945 or 1950, but America appears certainly at this stage, does not want to be involved unless it's on its own terms and it's under its own rules with its conclusions.
Well, speak of China here. Interesting, of course. From the U.S. side, they want China to consume more to develop the service economy, and China is doing that. Of course, in the process of doing that, the first quarter we are seeing the strong growth for 5.4%. Of course, since late last year, I believe the momentum has been catching. Earlier this year, that's not surprising. 5.4, a little bit maybe exceeding expectation a little bit there. But looking at the what China needs to do more probably to build a consumption market. Well, U.S. is trying to build a manufacturing base. China is trying to consume more. I mean, hopefully there will be more balance. Let's say. So we are seeing official coming out talking about, for example, this currency issues. They introduce a new foreign exchange policy that facilitate cross-border trade and the financing. Policies like this, are we seeing like a more open financial system and probably easier for the world, products coming to China, the China market?
Well, actually, since 2018, when the trade war started, China has been preparing over the last 7 years with what is termed as a dual circulation, where the domestic market will have to serve as a pillar role to weather possible headwinds from any part of the world, inclusive of the United States. And so therefore, the domestic consumption becomes the key driver. Therefore, China has issued a number of stimulus packages for two types of trade-in. One is to support the households to replace their gadgets, to robotization, and also to trade in more of the e-vehicles, etc. And I think more decisively is to support the companies, particularly when China is a big manufacturing house, to replace more of the old-fashioned, outdated equipments into new equipments to raise efficiency, and also to add a better quality to its product, either to be sold domestically or overseas. I think that's rather effective. And the other is that China decided to have institutional opening instead of policy-driven. So we are going to have a more structured and also more rule-based type of opening to the outside world by opening more of the sectors, particularly in this financial sector and also in the service sector, etc. So that's a big contrast to what is going on in the United States, where again, we welcome the global capable kids to play, on our soccer team. So yes, China has a lot of, the issues, what is termed as the technical barriers at home. So we are also, engaged in a huge campaign to unify the regulation and the common rules across China. So these are really the steps that China has been making.
With that, we come to the end of today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also watch us on the CGTN app on YouTube.